Welcome to the Project Management Coaching Podcast with certified trainer and project management expert, Dan Ryan.
Hey everybody, it's PM Exam Coach Dan, and I'm back with another episode of the Project Management Coaching Podcast. Please check out my site at www.projectmanagementcoachingpodcast.com. I'm really excited today because I am joined by Brian Patrick, who is a PMP. He is a Chief Technology Officer, a columnist, as well as a guest commentator. And one of the things that you're definitely going to want to check out right away as it relates to Brian is something that he's involved with called the Disruptors, okay? Now, the Disruptors, all right, you can check them out. You can check out the Disruptors, which is a multi-part vending machine series, all right? And the Disruptors is about highlighting people who break convention and disrupt the status quo, right? So these are brave individuals, unsung heroes who we meet every day, all right? And for more information, you should go to vendingmachine.com to check that out. But anyway, here we are. Thank you so much for joining and coming to the show today. Brian, how are you?
Dan, it is great being on your show. I'm so psyched. I really am. I love your podcast. This is great. You know, just keep it up. Just keep it up. I'm going to keep listening.
Thank you so much. Tell us about the Disruptors.
Well, thank you for being able to, for just mentioning. I mean, I started this column with Darren Smith. He's editor-in-chief, who's also, and his co-founder is Gary Michael Houston, who's actually the nephew of Whitney Houston. They created this e-zine to basically talk about the music industry. But then when Darren, he said, you know what, we need people with different experiences that we can bring in who also have just the kind of the passion to kind of create new content. You know, it's a digital site, so we need to get more followers, more visitors. So I was always fascinated by people who can disrupt an industry, a job function. We meet them every day, just like you were saying before. And I thought, can I do some profiles? You know, as a creative writing major from Columbia, I thought this is a chance for me to kind of branch out of IT a little bit and just experiment and just, kind of stretch my muscles. And that's exactly what he was able to do. He loved the idea. So I pitched the idea for this column where I'm able to talk to people from film industry, people who are working in nonprofit and philanthropy. So it's amazing what, the kinds of people that I've been able to meet and the kinds of experiences they have. And it's just a great thing. I think of it as it's not so much that I'm leaving the IT industry, it's that I'm enhancing my exposure to different things. And the better you write and the more you can bring people in, I think it helps. I think it just opens up everybody's world. And I think we can't have too much of that.
No, I agree with you. So, obviously you're referencing your background in IT. And of course, you and I have known each other from years past when we were involved in similar circles with technology support and project management. So it's very interesting to me to understand, what was this journey of yours like where, I don't know, maybe going back 5+ years or so when I knew you a little bit more intimately, we worked in similar circles. I knew that you were somewhat of a cloud expert. You had been involved working with data centers and things of that nature. Help me understand, how do you take a journey that puts you as an expert with data centers and cloud technologies, and how does it eventually migrate to come to this area that you're now describing?
That's that's a great setup. As a matter of fact, you may be a screenwriter in disguise. Thank you for getting that set up. I remember, like I said, back when we had known each other. This was back when all the banks were starting to merge together, the JP Morgan Chases and such.
Yeah, that's right.
And it was a very special space. So this was like late 90s into 2000. I've always been for most of my career, I should say, I've been a contractor. And because that's really where the need was, going into things like, building out data centers. The idea of cloud hosting was something that I gotten connected with. And they always needed good project managers. I first made a switch moving away from hands-on engineering, system admin work, moving into project management, because you had great engineers who knew a lot more than I knew, but they could not organize their work. So that's kind of what brought me into cloud computing, into what we now term as data center exits, getting off-prem and getting into a better hosted platform. Cloud service providers like the Amazons and Azure.
Can I just interrupt you there for 1 second?
Sure.
What happened to all of those massive air-conditioned data centers with all of those routers, hubs, and switches, and stacks, and aisles, and what happened to all that stuff?
That's a great question. Well, it's still there, but the problem is many companies, not just the large banks, but virtually every company you can think of, it's just the cost is too high. CFOs are they're being pressured to say, we need to, technology isn't critical, but the cost is too high in-house. Is there someone else out there, another vendor that can run the same data centers, co-location with the adequate degree of security? And the answer is obviously yes. Microsoft was smart. They realized they can't just make money on software. So hence they came up with the Azure offering. Amazon Web Services, same thing. Google Cloud Platform and Oracle Financial.
No, but I'm saying, like, what did those companies do with all that hardware? Did they just sell it, or turn it back in, or use it for other purposes?
Yeah, some of it. Yeah, in some cases it's been repurposed for other uses. Maybe from within. Sometimes they retain the software. What it all comes down to, every company has to decide. First of all, they want the newest hardware that's still under warranty. So the older stuff, typically, that's going to get expensed off. And the idea is, but the big thing is, it's not just that they can sell it off, because it's going to be a write-off one way or another. It's a savings of space. Now they don't need that data center.
It's $75 or $100 a square foot for space.
Exactly, which means they can start shutting down, and they can, some of these sites that they may have in certain regions, certain states or countries, they don't have to have those either as much space, or they can eliminate it altogether. Huge saving. That's a hard savings that a CFO can report back.
That's awesome. All right, so I cut you off. So, all right, so you were working with these firms and consulting, and these engineers, they didn't know how to organize their work. So you started getting more involved in the project management aspect of it. You got PMP certified. All right, now keep bringing me towards today from there.
Absolutely, yeah. Now, again, yeah, I was certified back in 2005, and that was really when I just kind of leapt in and said, all right, I'm going to start running these things in the way that no one else can, using my personal knowledge and experience and things. I was working for a small company that was acquired by Microsoft. This is probably what really got me to Greenlight. So this is where I got into the idea of a startup. It was a small company, 700 people. We were based, and the skill set they needed was someone who can take a product rollout, use it, and basically do a proof of concept, managing it like a project, because that's what it is, using all the traditional kind of, so it was a combination of doing the waterfall, understanding how to initiate, how to plan, and execute control, but doing it really agile style, meaning have a backlog, have a product sprint. What can you do every 2 weeks?
So have a hybrid approach.
Exactly. And we were doing this, Dan, back in 2007, when agile was still a very new word. Scrum was still very new. People thought you were talking about rugby, which is where the term came from. The whole knowledge of gathering together, and then somehow the plays come out of the Scrum. That's what we were doing at this small company called Fast Search and Transfer. That company, we proved, the POC that I managed, within the period of 3 months, we took a product that we had, which was enterprise search. We proved that we can integrate it as part of a SharePoint offering, meaning if you want to run through a search, do a Boolean search, instead of using SharePoint's native search, they were using our search engine. And it was much faster. It was contextual based. It was basically AI, before AI was a popular term.
That's neat.
And that's the niche. When we proved we could do that in the proof of concept, we did this at Pfizer. And when we proved that Pfizer, you can now take unstructured data, make it into structured data, and run this, and then take it and potentially resell this as a subscription service to other pharmaceutical companies, other drug companies.
All right. So Microsoft gets wind of that. They come in and they say, give me that.
Oh, yeah. They love writing $1.2 billion checks, apparently. Didn't come to me, but it came to the company. Right. But it was great, because from that's what I began to realize. I was basically running it like a startup, because we had to kind of think in terms of not just the product, but how to manage in a very agile way in terms of the finances and the people, the resources. So all the PMBOK knowledge was interplaying here, resource management and everything, and how to manage the budget for the POC, and then what's next, product road mapping, like a product manager. And I realized as I was doing this that I was really learning the skills of what a lot of co-founders learn in a lot of these IT startups. Mm-hmm. So long after, shoot forward ahead, long after Microsoft had a good time there, 2009 hit, 2008 to 9, that was a rough time. Mm-hmm. End of 2009, like I said, got my walking papers with a lot of us. But at the same time, it was great because December 2010, my consulting career took off in a way it never had before because I could tell that story. And every place, so Ernst & Young comes in, snatches me up and says, we have some choice premier project engagements, and we need someone who thinks like a startup type of person because we don't need a 9-to-5er. We need someone who can come in and think in terms of product road mapping. And that's exactly what I was able to do with Ernst & Young, working with their top clients, their name clients. And all of this eventually got to the point where I was able to take this with another group of co-founders who I'm working with now at Greenlight. And we're doing a lot of the same things we did before, but it's much smaller and it's very niche oriented all around basically our main business. The all business right, so, that,
yeah, no. So, all right. So you took these skills and these talents that you honed at these other institutions. Now you started Greenlight with a couple of other folks now where you're using this new sort of, how would you describe it in one sentence, Greenlight?
Our tagline is simulate your success.
Right. Okay.
So I mentioned AI.
Technology simulations.
Exactly. So really what we're doing is we've created scenarios, AI-based scenarios of any company. We specifically target startup companies. We can also target a line of business. And we've been doing this with companies like Bank America. We've been doing this with companies like New York City Health and Hospitals, where they're trying to grow out parts of their business to be more entrepreneurial. And that's what they're looking to us for. So our product can run a series of scenarios. And what we do is we do an assessment. We assess your capabilities using the software.
All right, let me jump in there for a second. So anybody who studies PMP is going to think of Monte Carlo simulations when they think about risk management, or you think about what if scenarios, or you think about different parts of quality. Basically, what I'm trying to understand is, are you, like, obviously this stuff is all done with software and computers here, right? And you're doing you're doing modeling so you get with companies, they tell you, sort of some different paths they want to take or they're thinking about, and you go and you do, what are you doing? Statistical modeling? How does this work?
Yeah. Think of it this way. Think of what we're doing as, we've also, you hit that perfect thing. We've been referred to as the Moneyball players. It's a tagline we didn't really take to it as well, but it's really the best way to think of it. The algorithms that we have, our proprietary algorithms, are exactly that. The company's trying to roll out a new product. That's the typical thing. Or changing a current one. They need to know what kinds of things will most likely happen. That's risk management. They don't want someone just doing a risk log. That's very static. Show us some scenarios based upon the inputs. So the front end of Greenlight, and we call it Smart Start. This is what that's our trademark. Smart Start basically asks you a series of battery of questions about not just the product you want to launch.
It's a survey.
Right. It's a survey, but the survey gets into your head. So it's not just the survey of what you want. What secretly we do, the questions are actually made or gauged to profile you as the entry.
No,
so we're getting a sense.
You ask like those pairs, all those different pairs of questions.
Exactly. Like what kind, so we learn about your compatibility with other people in management. We learn about things about how your natural agility as a leader, how quickly can you adapt to change.
Yeah. No, I've done some of this. I worked for a company, I won't mention the name, but I did they did personality assessments, and they did, they were trying to figure out certain strengths and enablers and competencies of people. And they would ask you questions in their surveys. And like, they would ask you the same question 15 different ways. So you couldn't game the test. The test was going to figure out who you were ultimately. And so they would ask you a question like, I often like to kick dogs, or I don't want to help an old lady up the stairs. And like, which one of those are you supposed to answer? Like, but they would just say like, you just have to pick one. And so what we determined was that they would say, some people would get angry and they would say, no, I'm sorry, I don't feel strong enough to pick either one. So then they had a button. What they did was, this was pretty clever. They added in a button that said, okay, if you can't pick either one, then just pick the arrow that points towards the one you're leaning towards. And when you chose that arrow, it was just choosing that answer.
That's that whole Briggs-Meyer thing,
Yeah. So, but sure enough, when you got this result, like I got my result and it said like, you like to delegate a lot.
Right.
Like stuff like, You don't like to take a lot of time to figure out real complicated things. You'd rather kind of just give it to someone else to do, like in the areas of improvement, All right, so you have this survey, you have these questionnaires, you take these inputs from all these various methods, you feed it into the Smart Start, and then it serves as the inputs for you to give these outputs to help them with this simulation and this modeling. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, each one, because it's 5 indexes, and each one of those indexes it scores you based upon different types of core competency. So if you're into sports, you go to the gym, they talk about work out your core muscles. Those are the muscles that help you do all the rest of the exercises. That's what we typically will say as part of our pitch to any client is you build your core competencies in your head. There's certain things you just have to know to be a good manager. Take the word project away. There's certain things you have to know: empathy, delegation, when and when not to. Those are things that all project managers have to have, all management needs to have, leaders need to have that. So we've been able to create the AI around that, and we keep reflushing the questions because at a certain point they can game the system. And the whole point is for them to see it fresh, to not realize what we're really testing them on. And the idea, the real value, is that if we can help a small startup, for example, what happens is the higher the score, they'll be able to get higher gross profit margins, higher month-on-month growth. These are things that VC companies want to see. They don't have a lot of good measurements. So that's our niche. Our area, is we're going to work with you to make those improvements for those metrics that the next Series A, Series B, Series C funding is now going to see. The score has been raised.
Because those folks are looking at that like it's some sort of a credit score for you or something.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we said. Yeah, it's kind of like the FICO. It's very hard to game it. We try to adjust for different things. Now, for large companies where they're not interested in that so much, the metrics are different. But the idea is the core competencies are still the same. Whether you're a 2-person company or whether you're a 10,000 plus company, those competencies are still necessary. That's where the whole focus has been on. It's been 3 years and we're still growing.
That's fascinating. Now, where you mentioned before that you, which I think is really fascinating, you were at Columbia where you became a writer. And I think you'd mentioned to me previously that you were a storyteller.
Yeah, it's now that's the one that usually gets people the most. And
in this timeline, when did you start going to Columbia?
It was weird. You know what? I'm going to have to talk. This one I'm going to chalk up to age, but in a good way. I'm in that, without calling out my actual age, I've entered that point where you start reevaluating, is this the midpoint of my life? Am I doing everything I want to do? Or is there something that I've left out? And I've always had a love of writing. This is going back to high school. But I always felt like there was something missing. And one day I just thought, I saw this application for Columbia University, and I thought, you know what, I'll give it a shot. Why not?
Like an MFA?
Yeah. Well, actually, for me, I actually went through, and I actually earned my associate's degree years ago, got into the whole certification, IT certification, like a lot of people, and I kind of stopped there, thinking I'll do it one day. And then one day becomes 10 years later and 15 years later. And then suddenly I thought, well, wait a minute, maybe this is an example of that kind of midlife reevaluation. Maybe it's time for me to rejoin. But to many people's shock, I didn't go into IT because my reasoning was, well, I'm already working in it and I've been working in it for almost 20 years. So I don't have the need.
What do I want to do in the next chapter?
Exactly. I'm already kind of head and shoulders ahead of the game of what I'll learn there. Don't need that. My passion has always been in writing, whether it be journalism or nonfiction writing, which is what I majored in. And honestly, never understand how they would have chosen a 40-something person. I'll never understand it, but the dean of the school, Dean Peter Orm, was amazing. He says, Brian, we don't make mistakes at this school. If you got in, trust me, we know what you have.
I guess what you're saying was the entry process was competitive.
Yes, you could say, it was, but the thing that was great about it, they use the term non-traditional, and I thought of this, and I thought, what, a lot of people I work with in project management spaces and things, it seems to work. Non-traditional meaning most of the people who went to my school were transfer students. It's the only school in Columbia that you can transfer into. Cool. And they have a wide range of ages from, again, pretty young, maybe 18, 19, going into 30s, 40s. And it's liberal arts based. You get the same education as everyone else who goes to Columbia College who's much younger. But the difference is a lot of the people coming out of our school are either military veterans. So there's a reason why they were out. Some of them are former Olympians. Some of them are musicians. Some of them are filmmakers, like my classmate Gianna, who I helped co-produce a film with. So think of the number of people who I'm bumping into, and some of them honestly have become tech startup founders.
It sounds like an eclectic bunch of people coming out of that program.
Absolutely. Every year they push out another 600 graduates, but it's one of the most diverse student bodies. And I'll tell you, I learned more, I believe, in those 4 years going part-time at night than I would have for anyone going to a 4-year school out of high school in the first four.
You know, I went back from my MBA when I was older, and it was the most enjoyable time. You know, I just took so advantage of it. I mean, I had to pay for it. So, you know, I made sure that I took advantage of everything. But yeah, you know, when you go through that when you're ready to do it and you're paying for it and you're serious about it, you make it a tremendous value. So, all right. So you came out of there and now you're a writer. All right. Now I really want to get into this now where you start writing, you start doing creative things, you actually get involved and you did some short films and some of these folks that you met with. Tell me how you got into the circle with these creatives, how you did the films, and how you got involved with the writing. You know, get into that a little bit.
I mean, yeah, and so Gianna Martin is my classmate. She was my creative writing classmate. One of the first creative writing classes I had at Columbia. She's a Californian type. She comes out of Burbank, California. If you've met someone from there, you kind of know what I'm going at. Very bohemian. Walked into class like, you know, like hair in a bun, wrinkled clothes, you know, cell phone in one hand, iced coffee in the other. You know, the kind of person you kind of figure, you think you know who they are, you walk in.
She's like boho chic.
Right, exactly. You know, and just kind of the whole, hey, you know, kind of just very, you know, calm and such. But what I came to learn from her and other people is there's so much more underneath the surface. And that's when I came to find out that she was doing an independent film called Dinner with Anna, which is an incredible film, short film based upon a short story. And she was basically trying to come up with ways of how do I launch this? How do I get this off the ground? She had the skills. She knows the camera work. She knows sound editing. She knows all the people, all the resources, right? All the subject matter experts and so on. And she also was doing the screenplay. So she had all the people in place. She just had trouble trying to organize it and figure out how to crowdfund and get enough money when you need it, which I learned when I kind of connected with her and came on board as a co-founder. Is getting the money is one thing, and that's difficult enough going on Kickstarter like she did or others, or Vimeo and some other places where you can actually raise money. The harder part is getting the money when you need it, because the resource, you may have the money, but the resources may not be there.
What kind of resources?
For her, usually the most people like sound grip, you know, people working the sound, you know, everything, and also when it comes to sound editing. So once you've done the scenes, you have to make sure you have all the equipment ready. The people operating the equipment have to be ready that day. So this is kind of like project management in many ways, where okay, when will the engineers be available? When will the developers?
You have a critical path. There's a critical path, and you're on a tight schedule. And all of these things have to happen like music. Otherwise, you could wind up the creek, so to speak.
Exactly. And approvals are important. Just like, in you know, working for banks and companies like we've been working for, we sometimes roll our eyes. Oh, we have to get an approval for this, approval for that. But this is different. Filming, if you don't have a permit to do a film, the police can be called in. You have a much deeper issue. The impact is much greater. And also the loss of time, which a lot of times in business, I think we forget. Honestly, we think it's not that, it's hard for us to see the expense. When you're a filmmaker, you see the expense every single day. Every time there's a costume change, something changed, or you took too long.
So when you're walking down the street in New York City and you see somebody filming on the corner and the police are holding back traffic so that they can get that all, like, you know, you think, oh, they just, you know, pulled up in a van and got out and started. That all took like tons of planning, permits, coordination with the authorities and all of that.
Oh, exactly. One of the things I was helping Gianna with is just using basically a version of a work breakdown structure, but something that a creative can think of. So it was like shoot number 1, site B, alternate site in risk management, alternate site 4B or 4C, because sometimes something happens, there's a traffic problem or whatever, you can't use that site. You need to have some other alternatives. So you have
to have like a whole fallback plan in place, like plan A, plan B, plan C.
Exactly. Like perfect example, Dinner with Anna, the house that most of the film is done in. What would have happened if the person who owned the home changed their mind? Ooh, that's the whole film practically. So one of the things they had to do was come up with alternate plans and also a calling list, kind of like a communication plan. So we could contact, per option B, option C, see if the homeowner is available on this particular day or the next day.
Yeah, that was a nice house.
Yeah, it was great too. Yeah, again, I think living not too far around the Burbank area, it worked out. In this case, Site A was working out, but if it didn't, I helped her plan for Site B or Site C, and also the communication to everybody else because they don't all live in the same area. So she had to send out a bulletin to everyone saying site change, going not Burbank, West Hollywood, 6 a.m. at a following location, and make sure that everybody received that communication and that everything shows up on time, which it never does. I find out, but at least if they know where to go, there's a better chance.
I'm hearing a lot of project management fundamentals throughout this.
It's more exactly. It's fun, isn't it funny? Because when you think of movies, at least when I think of movies, I never really think of it as a project, but it really does fit in so many ways.
Well, let me go down
everything.
Let me tease this out a little bit here. So, I mean, we know that technology is changing everything now. We have, as opposed to having the traditional movie lots, now you have companies like Netflix. We've got, digital streaming, technologies and apps. Let me ask you, what do you know about this new digital media in terms of, possibilities for project managers to get hired with some of these big companies? And who are these companies that they could work for?
The companies that can work, are you thinking specifically just the film industry per se?
I'm just thinking like digital media, like you might have like a Comcast or a Time Magazine or a Universal or something like that. Like, do you see that these digital media companies have needs for project managers?
Yes, absolutely. And you know what? I think it's because finance and biotech and other industries have been very project management centric, and they kind of suck. It's almost like a brain drain. Companies like Time, companies like Warner, Time Warner, companies like NBC, Universal, which is swiftly being merged into other companies. They seem to have a lot of difficulty finding good project managers. I know every once in a while I check on LinkedIn and I check on other sites like Indeed, just out of curiosity. And what I've noticed is it seems like they have a lot of project management need and program management need that may not be filled. I look to see how long it's been, and a lot of times it could be several weeks, and it seems like the jobs are still open.
Really? How do they pay? How do those jobs pay?
They seem to pay pretty comparable. I mean, typically the brokerage houses will pay a wee bit more, but it does appear that I think it's not so much a matter of there being a lack of parity. I think the bigger issue is people just don't view themselves as working for a USA Networks or an HBO.
Right. But it just doesn't seem like a traditional role for a PM that would be comfortable.
Exactly. And again, it's fine. I'm not trying to blame finance for it.
It would probably be totally exciting.
Yes. I mean, because again, you're working in a space that it's going to incorporate so many skills that we were just talking about, but you're going to be applying it in a different industry. But the idea is, the hope is that eventually people will learn. People will be able to kind of adapt their skills to a different field, realize, wow, there's so much more I can do. And since it's a non-regulated industry, ding, 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 it's a lot less focus on regulatory compliance and audits and things, and a lot more on, can you get this done? Can you get people energized and organized
to execute? If you have a charismatic, powerful, dynamic project manager, they don't have to be, knowledgeable about 4,000 facts and figures. Can you get the job done? Can you run a project, get in here and do it?
Exactly. Banking, they still ask sometimes, you have your Series 7 or Series 63, because I get it. It's part of that industry, especially for brokerage and even hedge funds. But in creative industries like digital media, film, television, that is not a concern. Certifications have no place. PMP is great, but they're more concerned with, can you help our people to understand the scope of work, manage a budget, and execute according to time. And time is really money in television and movies, even more so than banking, I would argue.
I believe it, like down to the minute. But listen, Brian, that's fascinating. We could talk about that all day, but I want to get back to the disruptors.
Yes.
All right. So we've come all the way through this journey of what you've done. It's been an amazing evolution of how you've traversed this technology career and then sort of migrated into this creative realm that you're in. And, now I'm really interested in really knowing about what you're doing with the disruptors. Tell me about these people that you've talked to. Who are they that they do this disruption? What are their qualities, and what are you doing on the day-to-day as you work with these folks?
I'm really excited about this because, again, this is something that we run into people like this all the time. We know them. And I like the way you put it. They're really unsung. Gianna was the first person I wrote about because it just made sense. I talked about her skill as being an indie director, especially as a woman director. And this is prior to, the Me Too movement and such. But it just, everything that she's been doing in her films tend to be more female-centric. And she does have unique challenges, as many women do, coming into any field, certainly film not the least of which. And one of the things that I was trying to pull out of her is, how do you find these gifted actors and cinematographers and sound editors? How do you find these people and pull them together? And you never get a straight answer from a creative if you ever watch any of these shows on night television. And I understood that. But what I did find is that the focus has always been more intersectionality. That's the buzzword these days. People from different sections and sectors of life coming together. If you don't already have preconceived notions, you can get a lot more work done. And the storytelling is also combined with that, because if the story you're telling has more of a cultural expansiveness, as opposed to, I tell stories about, more that are more derivative, things that have more commercial value, you tend to come out with things like The Hangover 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? It's definitely, it works, it's money making, but let's be honest, not exactly the most culturally expansive kind of project you can do in film. Whereas someone like Gianna, she's always looking at the films that you won't see, the short films about women's experience, how they interact with the men in their lives, their experiences, and giving value to them rather than patronizing them in some ways. And that was fascinating to me, because many filmmakers think this is not going to work. It's too female-centric, not enough men. We need to balance it out with more humor. Her stuff tends to be more on the dark side, but she says that's where the story needs to go.
Well, she might be earlier in her career too, and who knows where it could go, but I know that there are a lot of movie makers out there who would probably be totally enthusiastic about the type of work that she does. I watched that movie. I thought it was killer. And just not to sound like a dummy, but I mean, those cameras, some of those the video was so incredibly crisp in that movie. How much do those cameras cost? Are they like a fortune?
Oh, some of them are.
Do you rent them? Do you rent them?
She had, especially when you're an indie film director. I asked Gianna about that. Very few cinematographers own their work. They always have their own camera.
How much does one of those film cameras cost that I was watching with that movie, the dinner movie?
And most of these are like, I think anywhere from, and she would be the best one to say, I don't know if it's 80 millimeter versus like a lower millimeter.
Are they like $10,000 or more?
Some can be, yeah. The DVR is one, because everything's digital now. You can easily be spending somewhere in the neighborhood of, say, $7,000 to $10,000. And that's still not the highest end.
It was really beautiful to just look at the screen the way that the video was. It was amazing.
I know. And then they have filters and things for aperture. And these are all the things they know how to use. You may have seen a lot of films lately. They have different ways where they can put the yellow film around it, so everything seems a little brighter and yellow or blue or gray.
Yeah, like the movie Traffic, when they would go to Mexico or different places, they would use the yellow or the black and white effect.
Exactly. And she learned that. Now, she went to AFI. She got her MFA from the American Film Institute, Gianna, after she graduated Columbia. And they teach her all these things. And it's, again, but the way it's not just the technique, it's the way she combines it into the telling. Latest film she did now, which HBO just premiered at their Latin Film Festival this past weekend, it's called Sin Cielo, which for Spanish is like Without Sky. It's a really brilliantly put together, which is full Spanish with English subtitles, but it talks about these young Mexican girls in border towns of Mexico who disappear. This is based upon actual events. So this is what I'm talking about when I say real storytelling. She was able to tell one story.
That's a little too close to reality.
Yes, I know. It gives a different perspective on the idea of a wall. Well, what happens on the other side of that wall? Mm-hmm. And there's stuff that doesn't necessarily hit the papers as much, but these are based on actual events. They're actual towns where young girls are picked up.
I don't like walls, and I don't think we should build any, but I digress. But listen, let's circle back now. So she sounds amazing. Who else have you come across while working with the Disruptors? And tell me some more about that.
Another amazing person who I've worked with is called, so really switch gears, but also with the camera, is Devin Abdullah. Devin Abdullah is a model, and actually she was the winner of a reality series called The Face. The Face debuted back in 2013, and she was the winner of that one. Naomi Campbell was actually the creator of that. And as the winner, she won several modeling contracts. And basically what I did is I was interested to see, well, what's life been like after the show? We see a lot of these reality series like Survivor and Big Brother and The Bachelor. And people do wonder what happens afterwards. Where are they now? Exactly. And the good news is a lot of good things did come out. Devin did say a lot of good things came out of that experience. She learned from so many other top models and such. But one, you didn't see Naomi after that because she had to go on to other projects. So that does tend to happen. Those contacts kind of wean a bit. And those contracts you do get going forward, they tend to be shorter term. In modeling, you have a very limited runway in terms of, no pun intended. You have a very limited runway for your career in that sense. As you get to a certain point, the expectation is, have you made it into Vogue's magazine more frequently, or are you still struggling to do that? So she's still in the midst of trying to find the perfect space, the perfect kind of magazine to be in, and other shows and things. But she talks about it, and she also talks about the fact that she brings her daughter on the set, and I love that. I put that in the article because she says, I want my daughter to see what a strong woman looks like, what a person who's impassioned about her field looks like.
Well, Brian, I got to tell you, I really love to hear you talking about these types of industries and these types of things where women are becoming empowered. I have some women in my life that are very dear to me, and I also embrace these liberating concepts. Women are really emerging as powerful people in industries, and they're being recognized for their potential. Tell me, it seems like the disruptors really focusing on creatives, actors, filmmakers, models, writers. Is that just because of your background in Columbia and the folks that you met and your network, or do you just like that genre?
I can't even tell you exactly what attracted me to it. I guess maybe because
but is it true? Is it true though? Do you see yourself focusing on those types of people, or could next month you go and try to interview someone like Elon Musk or something?
I've actually, the funny thing is, originally I was looking at like other startup founders and kind of focusing on how to bring them in. But what wound up happening is, and again, when you're working for a publisher, you always get a different idea or a different push. So the push, because there's been such a focus on female-oriented businesses and leaders in that, I think a lot of it just was that, to your point. So it's not that there aren't incredible young men out there who are doing amazing things. They're out there, but those stories are very easy to find. The stories I'm finding about women, I find you got to look a little harder. You'll always hear about the Ruth Bader Ginsburgs, obviously the major, the Oprah Winfreys, the people who burst out the scene. But what about the people whose names that you didn't hear, who do a lot to help?
Tell me about some average woman who graduated in the middle of her class and made it big, right? If it was a guy, everybody would be talking about it like crazy, right?
Exactly. You would know so much about that person's experience. I got one for you, and she's my latest profile, Jackie Fields. Perfect example. Like I said, doesn't have the college experience that maybe some of her peers have, but she's my title was a faithful disruptor. She has the evangelical background. As a young Black woman who was trying to help her local community, she's been able to use a combination of her faith to find and to engage in philanthropic efforts to help women find jobs, to help other men in the communities where they are underemployed find meaningful, gainful employment, especially those who say have had maybe substance abuse issues or who have been formerly incarcerated. These are the kinds of stories we don't read about. They're uncomfortable stories. Some people don't want to read about this kind of thing. They'd rather read something that's more sensational. But that's the kind of stuff that got me about Jackie, that she put herself in there. And she's not a summa cum laude graduate of a Harvard University who's published books and books. Right. But what she's doing is she's taking her philanthropic efforts and she's trying to create a new television series that she's been selling the Oprah Winfrey Network, OWN, another site, and other channels. The hope is that a station will see what she's doing. And right now she's in the midst of trying to seal a deal with one of those channels to ensure she can have basically a portal, a venue to be able to bring out the women from the community, and as well as the men who they support and the men who support them, showing them and basically profiling them on her show. When I found out what she was doing, I thought I have to write about this person.
No, because I love that. I mean, everybody deserves a second chance. And, I've watched some shows. I won't say that I'm studied, but I did watch a show, and I can't remember this man's name, but, he ran into a little bit of legal trouble early on. He was adopted. He was African-American. He was adopted by a white cop. And basically, he got a kick in the pants by the white cop police officer dad, who was a great guy, and said, look, get your stuff together. You can't do this. You can't fool around. You got to go to college. And so they got him straightened out. And, he went and he got his law degree. And now he's really trying to reshape the criminal justice system and pointing out like a lot of the institutional types of just idiocy with these minor infractions leading to long time jail terms and and just the whole corporatization of the prison system. It was a whole show I watched for like 2 hours. It was fascinating. It sounds like this woman that you profiled would probably share a lot of things in common in terms of understanding some of the things that need to be fixed with our criminal justice system, and people need a second chance, and they can contribute to society.
Oh my goodness, this sounds like somebody who, even though her program is called Women with a Briefcase, that's the show, but it really does tie into the men, because it has to be combined. I can see Jackie wanting to get to talk to that person. That's the kind of thing that we need more stories of. And especially as we see that a lot of the struggles are not just specific to communities of color, although they're more pronounced, as we're seeing with the opioid abuse and things. One of the things that Jackie's been looking at is we have to look at what they call community revitalization centers. That's her idea. And what the television show is supposed to do is to create enough interest and enough donor money to be able to put money into these centers. She wants to select 5 different cities across the country, one in New Jersey, Newark, Pennsylvania, around the Philly area, New York City, probably around South Bronx area per se, Georgia and California.
They're reinventing the idea of a jail, basically.
Yeah, I mean,
am I looking at that wrong?
Well, actually, yeah, this would be the option, I would say, because So what you're doing is they're going into the community of where a certain percentage are likely to end up in jail or prison.
Yeah.
And we're going to revitalize that center into something, and let's face it, it's got to be more than just a couple of basketball hoops.
Yeah.
That's not enough, right?
Not the boys, the boys club, right. No,
Give
there's
them a
got to
little
be
more
training, there's got to be computers and technology, there's got to be stuff there that can actually help someone.
Exactly. And she even says the one important thing to remember what she's trying to do with that show, when I was writing the article, is she says there's no quick fix solution. There are deep-rooted problems. These communities are marginalized. There's so much recidivism, as you were mentioning, but it's not hopeless. And the hope is that even though she's talking about communities of color, there are many other communities throughout this nation, Midwest and South, and in the West Coast, East Coast, where they have the same kinds of problems, the same kinds of factors that lead to these things. And what I'm proud of her of, and why I was so happy to do this, is that while I see evangelical, that sometimes people tend to grimace these days. They're not sure, what do you mean by evangelical? Is this kind of a hardliner, Bible thumper? But she said it best when she said, I answer to one person, God. I answer to no man. My job is to not align myself with a particular church or politics. That is not what I do. I do the work that I'm told that I have to do. So this is the kind of thing from someone who's truly faithful. The idea is that it's not about party lines, politics, or ideology. She is truly a person with a mission.
Politics has a way of adulterating even the most beautiful concepts, including religion. But listen, Brian, she sounds amazing, as do the other disruptors. And I think what you're doing with the disruptors is awesome. I really like how your whole journey, I mean, I can't believe you and I were involved in tech support and all of the banking stuff way back when in the late 90s and early 2000s. And just to see that the path that you've migrated along has now brought you to something where you're really starting to have, what's really self-actualization, to be really happy with the things you're doing. I'm so glad that you made the choices that you did. And, it was really fantastic having you here to talk to me tonight.
Well, listen, Dan, this is really great, because I think, if I can leave off with anything, I could say that my path getting to where I am now, and this is not the end, I hope, it's nonlinear. There's no way I could have possibly planned that I would be at this point. There's no way that I could have predicted this.
Yeah.
But that's the beautiful thing about how we get through life. Most, I think, of what we do, whether it be in project management, in our particular industries, is unplanned, non-traditional, non-linear. And if we can just accept that, it's better.
At some point, you do have to decide, I want to do something that I like.
True.
Right.
True.
I mean, there are people who will just sit back and chase that money, regardless of whether or not they value it. And I think I'm doing it now with my podcast and my PMP coaching and training, but I think you've also made that choice that come hell or high water, you might have to sacrifice a few nickels even. You're going to start engaging in and immersing yourself in things that you love and that you're passionate about. And I think it comes through in everything that you do. So anyway, Brian, thank you so much for being with me tonight. I'd like to just remind everybody that Brian Patrick, is a columnist with Vending Machine Media, and he has a column called The Disruptors. And I really encourage everybody, take a look in my comments for this podcast. I'll have the link in there, where you can get to the disruptors. The disruptors is located at www.vendingmachine.com. All right. And thank you so much for being with me, Brian.
Thank you, Dan. It's been a pleasure and a privilege to be on your show. I really appreciate it.
You got it, pal. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Project Management Coaching Podcast, and we will see you next time.